Hey everybody, this is Randy Kaufman, professional engineer, and today I want to go over the bridge collapse in Kansas. Now, remember guys, this is a new channel. Subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up if you like the video. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to go over this is because I've seen a lot of comments on the internet about this, and it just drives me nuts. I mean, I was a assistant construction engineer for my division when I retired. I had a bad car wreck. If it hadn't been for that, I would have worked longer. And I would have probably became this, and I would probably became the construction engineer. But I was I was the assistant construction engineer for my division for roughly roughly 6 years. Now, the thing is, there are people that work on projects and everything, and they know certain things about it. There are only a few people, a handful of people that work in each division, and only some of the people that work in the division, the central office of the state, that really understand what goes into these bridge projects, or with any of these projects for that matter. So, there are a lot of people that work on the projects, and you think, well, they know something about it, and they do, but they don't know the whole scope of it. The whole scope of it, you don't understand until you've actually been going through everything that was involved in this. And that's what, the division personnel do. Now, I'm not an engineer in Kansas, and Kansas probably does things a little bit different than my state does. But, that's neither here nor there. I mean, the thing is, most of this stuff in the modern day time is mostly done the same way. Some are a little bit more progressive than others, some are not. But most every bridge these days are built with pre-stressed girders. And I've heard people on the internet blame it on politics, politics, politics. It's Biden's fault. It's all this infrastructure money. Oh, they want to hurry up and spend that money. That has nothing to do with anything. There is when the thing is, if the thing is, the infrastructure bill does provide a lot of money to everything. But the state also has to have the matching funds for this. I mean, that's what people don't understand. I mean, the feds put in for an interstate project, they put in like 90% of the money for an interstate project. And that sounds really great. But some of those, like right now, there's a bridge that they want to do over Mobile Bay. And that bridge is going to cost $2 billion. Well, that means the state has to come up with 200 million. The entire budget for Alabama is around 800 or 900 million a year. That's the entire budget. That's for resurfacing every road, everything. So to have to fork over $200 million is not easy. That's the reason they've been talking about putting toll bridges in for it for a while until it gets paid off. Different things like that to raise revenue because they don't have the revenue there to actually just fork over $200 million for one project. Now you may think, well, this is a big project, one-time thing, and they want to do it quick because the bridge is obsolete. I mean, there's a lot of times, people will say, oh, I've heard, like my brother says, oh, well, we need to put toll bridges in. Really, you want to pay $5 for a toll to go 5 miles? I'm like, one way, and then you're going to go that way during the day and that way during the night when you're going to work and back. And I'm like, you want to pay $10? I'm like, guess what? You go up on the gas tax by 10 cents over the state. That'd be more than enough revenue for all this. But nobody wants a gas tax increase, even though the gas tax is the same gas tax as we had since 1993. Now, you don't think things aren't more expensive since 1993? And I mean, this it's not like in the 60s when we built the interstate. When we built the interstate, the cities weren't nearly as big. What did you have in the 60s? You had a telephone pole with power. That was it. If you had to move that, all you had to do is move a telephone pole and two cables. Now you've got cable TV, you got fiber optics in the ground, you've got gas, water, sewer, and all this stuff is in the ground, and all this stuff has to be moved, and you have to have some plans drawn up for that. Now, when they go out now for a project like this, and people just really don't understand what goes on with it. I mean, the thing is, they're going to go out, and the first thing they're going to do is they're going to have a guy decide where do we need a road at, to relieve congestion and to make, traffic better. Well, when they go out and they decide where they need a road from one spot to another spot, well, after they do that, they've got to go out and they've had to first of all go out and survey the land out. That's the first thing you got to do. And it's going to take you, depending on how big, how long the project is, it may take you a few weeks, it may take you several months to survey it. Now, after you get the survey done, they have to create a map of the ground and all that. And then they're going to sit down and they're going to hire a set of engineers because the DOTs don't do it in house themselves. Because everybody wants private individuals to do things. So, it's like a long time ago, the DOTs contracted all this stuff out to engineers. Most of all the states do now is do inspection work to make sure it conforms with what it's supposed to be. Now, they may go out and they may test it, or they may hire somebody to test the soil, and they go out and they drill here. And sometimes I've seen the drills off. I've seen a bridge that we did that, they drilled it, they hit rock at like 35 foot, and that was where the piling's supposed to be driven to. Now, the piling are these big H pieces of, they look like an H when they're at the end, but they're big long sheets of metal. Now, the metal is driven into, the big long pilings are driven into the ground so they hit rock. And we hit the rock, but fortunately, the guy, when he pinged the rock, he hit it again. When he hit it again, it went through the rock. And it just kept on going. And it went down for something like 70 something feet. So we had to go in, and of course, we got everybody out from the division to look at it. That's back when I brand new at DOT and I was working on a project. And we had to get everybody out. We had to explain everything because this was a huge cost overrun. Those pilings are not cheap. And so, and you're going to have to sit down and drive a lot of them. I had to be driven below that rock. And it had to be done. But, but you still had to inform the people in the division while you had a big overrun. And it had to be done because if you had set that piling up on top of that, well, the weight of it would have just made the pilings go through that thin layer of rock, and it would collapse just like this bridge. And it could be something like that. It may not be anything like that. I mean, that's just an educated guess that it's maybe something like that. It could have been that, like, years ago, that, when they may have, I've seen projects like this 10, 15 years ago. They surveyed it out. They did the course 10 or 15 years ago. And 15, 20 years ago, it may have good solid rock up underneath it. There are water up underground that wears a hole in it. That's when you get sinkholes and things like that. And a sinkhole could have come through it. You never know. I mean, because this could have been years since they actually did the core work. Because they may have started doing the plans, may have put it on the shelf because they didn't have the funding for this bridge. But now that they got funding, they may have went in and said, okay, let's go fund the bridge. And they assume the data is still good from 10 or 15 years ago. I've seen a lot of projects were like that because, you just don't have the funding for it, so you put it off. But now, I don't know what happened here. Nobody knows what's happened here. Until you send a set of engineers out, you do some coring, and you do some testing, you're not going to know. And, that's just the bottom line. It's probably not the design. I mean, I've heard people say, oh, it's that cheap steel from China. We don't get our steel from China. It's like my state, you had to get it from Alabama. Everything has to be got in Alabama. That's the way Alabama law writes it. And if you can't get it in Alabama, then you have to explain a reason why you can't get it in Alabama, but then you have to get it inside the United States. If you can't get it in the United States, it's really rare. You have to sit down and specify why this is a sole source provider. And you have to give a really good explanation that nobody else in the world makes it except this bunch. And I got to get it from them. But for the most part, this steel is made in the United States, so it's not the steel. I've heard a guy say it's the false work. Unless this bridge is built like back in the 1950s, it's not that. I mean, because this day and time, what they do is they build the columns, they go out, they set girders. And they're these pre-stressed concrete girders, and they set them in between those caps. And then after they're set, they go out there with a set of metal decking and they weld the metal decking to it. There's no false work except on the very outer edge where they're going to put the barrier rails. And that's it. There's no false work that's involved as far as the decking part. They tie the steel up, and that steel is tied up on top and it's tied to all that decking and all that and to the girders. So when those girders collapse, it's going to pull that steel with it. And so probably it looks, and usually those things are spaced evenly, those columns, because they don't want to go a longer length because you're going to have to be bigger columns because the girders are going to be bigger. And so by the looks of that bridge, those would have been spaced evenly. It looks like there should have been a center column there, and that probably collapsed. Now, why it collapsed, I don't know. I mean, but it's probably something to do with the foundation part. But the design of these things, they're pretty standard for a bridge of that size. That's not an unusual looking bridge. Then a lot of times they've done these bridges now for the last 40 years or so the same way, and they just pull them off the shelf as far as like the girders, the columns, and all that. Those are not unusual. Now, where you have to design them, the design part of it is in the foundation because all foundations are different. But like the column lengths and stuff, yeah, you had to do that because the bottom of the river to the top of the bridge will be a little bit different, but the columns are pretty standard. But your foundations, that's going to be where you either you're going to sit down in this day and time. Usually they still drive a lot of pilings, but um, there is a one now that you sit down and you bore a hole and you put like steel rebar down in there and you flood it with concrete. And that is, and then you don't dry piling to refusal. And that is a way that they started doing it in the last probably 10, 15 years to some of these. But all that is pretty well standard. I mean, it's just like there's something with that foundation that probably collapsed that caused this. It's probably not a design error, but it's probably in the investigation, the foundation, or something that went wrong. And it may be that they did it exactly right, but like I said, you have a river there, and you have underwater rivers, and that stuff wears through rock. If it wears through the rock, well, the pollen's are going to go through it. It's going to collapse. You have sinkholes that pop up. There's nothing you can do about that because you never know when that water is going to wear through a layer of rock. And it's just impossible. But anyway, that's probably the best explanation I can probably give without actually having the data for it, and without investigating it. But I mean, it's not about politics. I mean, I've never seen politics involved in anything. I mean, we don't. The only time I have seen politics involved is when the state got sued over the fact that they had gotten mud into a river and they were being sued environmentally. And then at that point, they were being sued for millions of dollars. And then the governor got involved and the transportation director because they wanted to hold these contractors' feet to the fire about never letting this happen again. And but that was because it cost them a lot of money. It cost the state a lot of money. All the lawyer fees, all the stuff that they were involved with, and it was this project that the people really there didn't want it built. I mean, they were, and the thing was, the project engineer, he had a golf course on one side and he had wetlands on the other, and he put two steep slopes in, trying to minimize the right of way that he had to buy. And this stuff has to be mitigated when it's wetlands. So it's really expensive, and he was trying to save money, but it wound up costing a lot more money. Well, you know, the the governor got involved, the transportation director got involved, but they wanted this stopped. They wanted, no more of anything to ever get any kind of water. And it really does destroy the fish for several years. I mean, eventually the mud will dissipate. Eventually it'll repopulate over years. I mean, they'll show this pristine. I saw this pristine river that was there, and they were redoing this bridge they built back in the 1930s. And they were talking about, oh, but they took Boy Scouts there and they fished, and it's a beautiful pristine river. I'm like, yeah. And back in the 1930s when they built this too, they didn't use any environmental controls at all, and they just threw that thing up, and it probably messed the river up for 5 or 6 years, until it cleared out again. But nobody wants that these days because nobody wants the stuff in the water, and a lot of times you can't blame them because you get those contaminants in there. There's diesel fuel and everything else, oil, and that gets into the water, and it's not good for anybody's health. But I've never seen politics involved in anything. I mean, the projects are there. Usually, the state goes out. They know where they need They only have a certain amount of money. They know where they need to have roads built at. And what happens is they allow this. It's not directed by Congress. It's not directed by the senators, the president, nobody. What this is, our governors don't even get involved with this. They have a set of roads that they need done. Now, you may get some that moved up in priority because it may be some company that comes in and they build a road really fast for them, and they'll delay some other project because this is going to bring employment to an area. But you have to understand, that's good for people. You're creating jobs for them. I mean, we did a I was on a project where we did one for Toyota, and we built a road. We built roads for them really fast, and it was like we had the 4 lane. And when Toyota was coming, they rushed it through and they got plans. They already had the plans out for a 4 lane highway to come through. They already had the road in front of it. It was already a 2 lane. They just widened it out into a 5 lane, but the road was already there. And so to go in, they already had the surveys done for all this for future expansion anyway. And so they had to go in. They got everybody to buy the right of way quick. They went in and they did all this. And but it still took them over 2 years to go in and do this. And in the 4 lane for one of the roads, it wound up taking them about 4 years to do. And that's fast. I mean, none of this stuff is done really quick. And that's just what it takes. That's, in this day and time. It was a lot quicker back in the 60s. It cost a lot less, but back in the 60s when we were doing the interstate, we didn't have fiber optics, gas, water, and sewer, and all this stuff in the ground. You had a telephone pole with electric and probably a telephone line. That was the only thing up there, and that's all you had to move. And most of the time when they built these roads, they built them they built them through farmland, and till they approached the city, and then they tried to go to the other side of the city as much as possible because they didn't want to buy the expensive right of way back then even. And the cities were much smaller, and there wasn't all this stuff built up, and they went through and they did all this. But nowadays there is so much utilities there, and then you have the right of way to buy, the utilities to move. I mean, it's expensive. It's far more expensive, and to do it today than it was back then. But people don't understand. Politics has nothing to do with this. I mean, there's the Fed, the money that they send in, like for your gas tax. Part of it's state, part of it's federal. The state takes theirs, and they have to match the funds. The state, even on an interstate project, they put up like 90% of the money. Some of it's like 70, some of it's 50 on different projects and stuff, depending on what the level of the road is. But when you start talking about a $30 million road for a very short, and that's not a very long road, maybe 3, 4 miles. It's new construction. And so you're going to have to sit down in your state, you're going to have to pop down $15, $20 million for this. We got a bridge right now that's in Mobile Bay that's going across it, $2 billion. Well, they got, even at 10%, they still got, the state has to pump in $200 million. The whole state of Alabama, the gas tax, they only have about $800, $900 million to pay all their employees and pay all their contractors, to resurface roads all across the state, all that. And that may sound like a lot of money, but when you sit down and you start talking about a resurfacing job here and a resurfacing job there, and they're $1 million, $2 million a pop to do 6 or 7 or 8 miles of resurfacing, that money goes fast. And the heavy trucks destroy the roads, but the cars actually help the roads. The heavy trucks actually destroy it. The heavy trucks, they have 30% is what they pay in. 70% of the money comes from cars, from the gas tax. So, and then most of these Teamsters, when they lower the weight down, because the weight on the trucks is what destroys the road. And the Teamsters did not want to have it lowered down. They wanted to be up, back up higher than it was before this. And they said, "Oh, we'll pay extra. We'll pay for the damage we're doing to the road if you let us just increase this." And I'm like, "You're not even paying the damage now." So, it's like Amazon. They got Bezos, makes billions of dollars a year, doesn't pay taxes. Amazon doesn't pay taxes, but they use your roads and they damage your roads, but they only pay 30% they only pay 30% of the money for the damage they do. They're only paying 30%. That's it. So, they'll say, well, if you pass that cost along to them, they're going to pass it on to the consumer. That's true. But also, if you pass it on to them, you're still not going to have to pay as much in gas tax. I mean, it's all evens out. I mean, there's no way around this. Because, like if you start taxing them heavier for that diesel fuel, yeah, they're going to pass it on to you, but, you would have better roads for this. And you wouldn't be stuck on a bridge for an hour and a half with traffic backed up because, they would have money to do the bridges from that instead of sitting down and having to resurface roads all the time because of these heavy trucks. And, that's where it boils down to. But guys, I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoy it. And remember, subscribe to the channel. Give it a thumbs up if you like it. And thanks for watching.